wherever you would like to take it. I'm like, oh no, I was supposed to come up with it.
Okay. 1 second. So, okay. So how to do the work of anti-racism. Silence is collusion, and being passive is an endorsement. And I think about that when I hear my favorite quote. So I'm going to share my favorite quote with you. And it is by a Holocaust survivor. Excuse me. Ellie was so, oh, excuse me. Oh, my apologies. The rest. It's in the wrong place. Sorry. My favorite quote, and it says, "We must take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the oppressed. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. Sometimes we must interfere. When human lives are endangered, when human dignity is in jeopardy, national borders and sensitivities become irrelevant. Wherever men and women are persecuted because of their race, religion, or political views, that place at that moment must become the center of the universe." Now, I like and love, if you will, that quote because we must take sides. It's exactly what doing the work of anti-racism is. It is saying that I am not going to be passive, that I acknowledge that there are structures and systemic and systemic barriers in place that impede the ability for a population of people, the Black diaspora, to accurately cash in on the promises that America gave. And that is simply life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. My name is Amber Booth McCoy, and I am your favorite diversity specialist. And that is only because you don't know a second one. So just that is why I am your favorite. One day people are going to find a second one, and I'm not going to be able to say that. I love, love, love the work that I do. And I do the work that I do because of these boys that you see on the screen. I like to think about the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion as taking up space. That's what it feels like to me. When I come in a space, I want to take up so much space, being my multi-dimensional self, that 3 people can sit down on either side of me. And that they then are so much their multi-dimensional selves that 3 people can sit down on the side of them. Very often, what I hear, I think people think about inclusion like pie. And more for someone else means less for someone else. You include someone else and someone else isn't getting something, but that's the exact opposite of what inclusivity is. Inclusion is more like water, and water is the most powerful force on the earth. The more we have, the stronger everyone is. Because until society works for the most vulnerable of us, well, then it truly works for none of us. So this space today, we're going to discuss what does it look like to be anti-racist and to do the work of anti-racism. We're going to think about it exactly like what it is. It's a public health crisis. Racism is currently a pandemic within a pandemic. We were all turned upside down in 2020, and we are now visiting what I often call New Earth. That's what this place is. This is New Earth, and none of us have we've never been to New Earth before. And the exciting part is, if we do this part right, if we are able to capitalize on not what people think is a moment, but we continue to make this a movement where individuals are saying, you know what, something does need to be done. I cannot sit on the sidelines. I cannot be silent. I cannot be passive. How do we do the work? it is going to, in this one, if we could solve it in really 4 steps, that would be awesome, but I've not yet figured out how to reach the manager of racism. I don't know how to contact them, but if there were a manager, and I'm sure that they would agree that these 4 steps would knock it out. We're going to diagnose and eradicate societal colorblindness. We're going to remove ambiguity, and demand context. We're going to excise racism and anti-Blackness, and then make matter the minimum. So in order to decide how we are going to do anti-racism work, then we should probably define what is an anti-racist. It is someone who is supporting an anti-racist policy through their actions, expressing anti-racist ideas. This includes expression or ideas that racial groups are equal and none need developing. Now, when I think about anti-racism and doing the work of anti-racism, it means that you're going to advocate in spaces where others who may identify as Black or Indigenous or a person of color don't have access. I can advocate for myself if I'm in the room, but if I'm not in the room, I'm unable to do so. Someone once asked me how many times I had been discriminated against in my life. And I said I was unable to answer that because I'm not in the room when it happens. I'm not in the room when my resume is passed over because I checked the box that gave my identity. I'm not in the room when maybe an apartment complex didn't want to rent to me because I checked the box with my identity. Anti-racism means that we're going to speak up, but it also requires us to be authentic, transparent, honest, and acknowledge that we are not going to get it all right all the time, and that we're not going to be the best ally at all times. The goal is to continue doing the work, to not allow one very, very hard problem to continue being the hard problem. That's the issue. When we were in school, our teachers told us to skip the hard questions so that we have more time to focus on it at the end. And America has been skipping the hard question for a very, very long time. And for many, that's okay. But when I think about the 3-word statement, that in 2020 caused anger and uproar, it was affirming to some and offensive to others, and it is simply Black Lives Matter. When I hear the words Black Lives Matter, I don't think about the organization or parties and politics, because I'm thinking about my sons. I'm thinking about my husband. I'm thinking about myself. My 15-year-old is 6 feet tall. And even though I know I see still my baby, my curly-headed baby boy, I know the world sees a Black man. So when I hear the words Black Lives Matter, it gives me pause and breaks my heart simultaneously that there is opposition to matter. So I'm the daughter of a principal, and thus as such, I love words. They're like my friends. I absolutely love polysyllabic words. I am most certainly a sesquipedalian, which is just a big word for people who use big words. That's how much I love words. Well, I wanted to look up matter. And the definition of matter says, a subject for consideration. There's a population of people asking for their lives to be a subject of consideration, and it's being met with opposition. it's being turned into politics and parties, and it has nothing to do with either. It is saying, when we say Black Lives Matter, there's a global pandemic, and most places are requiring masks. And for the first 2 to 3 months of the pandemic, I wouldn't let my sons go in stores. A Black man with a mask on his face? That did not seem like it would end well at all. The amount of time that I have to spend wondering how to safeguard my sons in a different way, wondering if the last time I got pulled over, the first thought I had was, have I told my sons everything they need to know? The very real possibility of not making it home to my sons for a traffic stop is why conversations about anti-racism have to happen. It is not enough to simply say that we're going to be colorblind, because see, while the intent may be to say, I try not to treat people differently because of skin tone, I try not to let skin color affect my views or opinions. When someone shares with me that they are colorblind, I'm confused. How will we move the needle when it comes to health disparities, criminal justice, generational wealth, education, when we know that the biggest gaps are among racial divides if we're not willing to see it? How can we fix things we are unwilling to see? And in particular, while being a Black woman is not the sum total of who or what I am, it very much informs my lived experience. And I absolutely love being Black. But if someone says that they don't see it, it's almost as if they've tried to erase that same experience, and without my permission. We love to see color in nature, in art, and in fashion, and then are often proud to say that we don't see it in these 7 billion beautiful complexions around the globe. The Center for Disease Control defines health disparities as preventable differences in the burden of disease, injury, violence, or opportunity to achieve optimal health. And the key word here is preventable differences. Now, if in Arkansas, as a Black woman, I am 3 to 4 times more likely to die from maternal-related complications than my white counterparts, than my white friends, if we went in on the same day to have babies. But the CDC says that it's preventable, then being passive isn't going to help me stay alive. I need individuals willing to do anti-racist work because it saves lives, not just because it's the right thing to do. We at this institution have made a commitment to serve and help the population around us. In Little Rock, we are almost a minority-majority city. So what do our stats say when it comes to the pandemic, treatment of the pandemic? We know that Black and brown populations are dying at much higher rates than their counterparts. Then there has to be an explanation, right? Because COVID in and of itself doesn't know that anyone is Black. COVID never just said, "Ooh, you know what? I'm gonna get the people with the most melanin. I just think that that's where we should go." It's not. It works. We must remove ambiguity and demand context. So what I mean by that? So very often when we're talking about these societal issues, we say that race is the biggest issue in society. That is untrue. And it's untrue because race in and of itself has never killed anyone. No one has ever woken up and said, oh, I am Black, and died just because they were Black. It is not on record. I cannot find it. If you find it, please send it to me. It would, hey, never. Race is not the biggest issue. Racial prejudice, racial discrimination, racial bias, those are the biggest issues. And that is why context is important. Because when we say race is the biggest issue, we make it seem as though the issue in and of itself is the person being that race, that I identify as Black and that is the problem. No. Racial bias against Blackness is the issue. Not being willing to see Blackness is the issue. As a Black woman, I am often in this place of wanting to help, and somewhere between wanting to help and turmoil all at the same time. My likeness is used to sell everything from vaccines to what is cool and hip, while still being ignored when trying to get health care and advocate for myself in spaces where I should be able to advocate for myself and be heard. When I say talk about things in context, let's talk about healthcare right now. The vaccine, and we know that even though Black and brown populations are dying at much higher rates, we also are seeing that they are not being vaccinated as much. Why would this be? I mean, it must be that Blacks are just not smart enough to understand that the vaccine is helpful. The narrative is always, well, Blacks don't trust healthcare. Is that in context? Or should we say healthcare has a history and a very extensive record of disregarding Black bodies and lives, whether it is the Tuskegee trials, whether it is Henrietta Lacks, whether we are talking about the forced sterilization of over 3,000 women in the South alone in the 80s, or like we just said, dying today in a first world country from giving birth. This is Anarka, Lucy, and Betsy. We often talk about the father of gynecology, Marion J. Sims. But if he is the father, these are the mothers. These are 3 enslaved women that he operated on without anesthesia until he perfected his surgery, because he said Black women could not feel pain. And months later, after these women had endured countless surgeries in front of very large crowds with no anesthesia, when he began performing those same surgeries on white women, anesthesia was used. In context means that we stop lauding his achievements and we say, thank you, Anarka, Lucy, and Betsy, for the fact that you are still saving women today simply because of what you had to endure. Exercising racism and anti-Blackness. Anti-Blackness is that visceral reaction that is felt when someone says, well, we've got to do something to help the Black population. And instantly it's, well, we just need to help them get up by their bootstraps. Where are the bootstraps? President Lyndon Johnson said, you cannot hobble a man for 400 years, remove his chains, move him up to the front of the line and say, you are now free to race with the others. If we're going to acknowledge that we have to see and not be colorblind, we're going to put things in context and acknowledge them for what they are. In 2020, there was so much coverage and story about women being able to vote for 100 years. Is that accurate? Black women organized during the women's suffrage movement, and in fact, they wanted to have separate marches, and the Black organizers said, no, they need to see us march together. We will not have separate marches. We will march side by side for the right to vote. And in 1964, Black women were still standing outside asking for the right to vote. So those headlines should have said, white women have had the ability to vote for 100 years. Anti-Blackness is the disregard for Black bodies, lives, legacies, and lineages. Acknowledging that Black women helped with women's suffrage, but then were not granted the rights, that's anti-Blackness. And silence and not acknowledging that is anti-Blackness. When there is news coverage that an unarmed Black man has been killed, and the first thought is, well, what did he do? Newsflash, even criminals should make it to jail. Even if a crime was committed, you should be able to make it to jail. Now, Dylan Roof, a white man who shot up a church, an AME church, not only did he make it to jail after killing multiple people, but they stopped to buy him food on the way to the prison. And when I get pulled over, I just want to make it home. Anti-Blackness is why we have to talk about anti-racism. Anti-Blackness is the absolute disregard from everything, from not wanting to hear the truth, to upholding the same structures that are continuing to place people of the Black diaspora in such positions. And I challenge you to charge and question narratives. Flip the identity in the news stories. And if you feel differently with a different identity, it's wrong either way. Example, if white women were dying at the rate that Black women are when giving birth, there would be unlimited coverage. Someone would be at fault, and we would need to figure out right now how to stop this. If you can hear these stats and say that is so sad and not do anything, you are not doing the work of anti-racism. Anti-racism is where we call out systems of oppression. Anti-racism is when we say that in our city, in the Little Rock School District, in December of 2019, many members of the community stood on the steps of Central High asking for one LRSD, asking for equitable access to resources, access, and information. 62 years after people already stood on those same steps asking for the same thing. Anti-Blackness is the disregard for the ask, the being annoyed by the asking, and then silence because not caring whether it is done. That is anti-Blackness. When I was, one of the protests that I did attend last year, there was a very old white woman with a sign. Her sign said, "I'm 80 years old and I can't believe I'm still having to protest this, you know what?" And I thought, I don't know how many rallies she's been to. I instantly wanted to be her friend, side note, but I don't know how many rallies she had been to. I don't know how many protests. What I do know is that her attendance is safer than my attendance at those same protests. The one protest that I attended, the information that we received said that we were to go and we were going to sit on the steps. After sitting on the steps for approximately 5 minutes, I looked up and I realized there were snipers pointing at us. There was already police in tactical gear as we sat on the steps. And on January 6th of this year, we saw individuals tear into kill individuals over the fact that they did not like the outcome of a democratic process. And after committing terrorist acts, got on planes to go home. Now, if we flip the identities, as I said, in the event that I was going to attend an insurrection, I would have left my will, my directives, all information that was needed to care for my children. I would have signed over accounts, because the likelihood of me making it back to the plane to make it home after committing terrorist acts, I could have died sitting on the steps at the Arkansas Capitol. Make matter the minimum. There is so much opposition to the simple phrase, Black Lives Matter. Things such as Blue Lives Matter. So just briefly, if you are not an avatar or a Smurf, there is no such thing as a blue life. That's an occupation. You can put an occupation down, you can go back, you never go back to work again. My skin doesn't come off. And to compare the two is not only wrong, it is anti-Blackness. To need to justify killings of people who look like me because we must trust the police officers, and I am saying that the heroes are wearing the same clothes as the villains, and there's confusion. There is no such thing as a blue life, because there are Black and brown police officers, and there are videos, there are testimonies, there are accounts that when they take their uniform off, they are again Black and brown. They are pulled over the same, they are profiled the same, they are followed in stores the same. So the blue life must be a myth, unless we're going to acknowledge it in context. White, blue lives matter, because it apparently is not all. And if all lives matter, then what is the opposition to hearing that Black Lives Matter? I have never shown up to the Race for the Cure and said, but what about liver cancer? We cannot just have this march about breast cancer. That's not fair. Liver cancer is killing people. Or do we understand equity when we want to understand equity? Equality is where we give everyone equal parts. Equity is where we give what is needed to whom it is needed. We did not get the disparities that we have in wealth, in healthcare, in education, in criminal justice by giving equally, and thus we will not fix them by giving equally. Equity and justice are a step in the right direction. Doing the work of anti-racism means that prior to engaging in conversations about race, you do your homework. That it is not necessary for you to bring your guilt or your shame about the current society and place it on my lap, because now I must console you because you are upset about my experience. It is also not the job of Black or Indigenous people to continually cut themselves open to allow for emotional learning of non-Black and non-Indigenous people, which is what happens more often than not. We are often proud to be scholars, to call ourselves academicians, and there is enough data on race and racial relations and the history of race. And you don't have to go far, you can start right here in Arkansas. Many of the buildings that we walk in today on the UAMS campus, those last names are on the same bill that in 1863 decided that free Blacks were really messing up the idea of the enslaved people. And so by January 1st, all free Blacks had to leave Arkansas. That was passed. Congress passed this. Okay. Well, if you were a business owner, if you were a homeowner, would anybody buy your house if they could just take it from you on the 1st? Because if you were still there after January 1st, they were going to put you in slavery. So as people fled Arkansas, these Arkansas refugees, our home state, because just a few years later they were allowed to come back, do you think the individuals gave these homes back? So the generational wealth, many of us know someone who maybe their house has been passed down from their grandmother, and it's been in their family for years. Well, the fact is, on American soil, every time there has been a Black community prospering, white rage has burned it down. You can look at Seneca Park in New York, Rosewood in Florida, Tulsa, Oklahoma, and you can look in Arkansas. You can look at the Elaine massacres. Understanding the context allows us to do things differently. Being willing to see allows us to diagnose the problem correctly. Being uncomfortable is where the growth is. I know for a fact I'm not going to the gym until my pants don't fit. That's when I realize that there needs to be change. Having uncomfortable conversations is a must, and it is necessary. And I don't know who promised comfort, but I can guarantee you that the Black and Indigenous people in your lives will share their discomfort with you a little, if it means that we are one step closer to not having to protest this at 80. In the line of things, matter, remember, means to be a subject of consideration. Care is a little bit above that. Like, love, matter is all the way down here. And if you are still battling with opposition to matter, then anti-Blackness and anti-racism should be daily homework for you. We must take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim, and silence encourages the tormentor. It said that we have center of the universe moments. And the thing is, everyone has center of the universe moments. When you're at Thanksgiving and Uncle Joe says that bigoted or racist thing that he always says, and you say, Uncle Joe, that's not okay. And Uncle Joe may never stop saying things that are not okay. But somebody saw Amber take her center of the universe moment. And maybe they take theirs next time. And every single time somebody takes their center of the universe moment, I get one step closer to not fearing for the lives of my son when they walk out of my house. I went to Walgreens recently and I started picking up things and I had my key in my hand. And I wanted to put my key in my pocket and I realized I can't put my key in my pocket. So I'm walking around Walgreens like this, trying to hold stuff because I can't put my key in my pocket because I know what suspicion that will arouse. But every single time somebody takes the center of the universe moment, I get this much closer to maybe just putting my key in my pocket. Because yes, this is true. I did not think to get a basket. I don't know why. The basket was not in my head. That's true. But point's still the same. Anti-racism work is hard, but it's not harder than actually experiencing racism. So I promise you we're happy to share. That's all I have.
Thank you, Amber. Guys, anybody